Today on Living History, it's Shaan Price.
I was asked to do an advertisement, and it was always very, very common that they'd have a picture of a Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or something. They say, can you do this? So they had me do some jumping in the air with the ball and so on, and they had me do a Michael Jordan type of pose, and that became the image that they used across the country for their brand. And then years later, Michael Jordan suing them, and I'm thinking, oh.
Today we're speaking with Shaan Price, who was a professional basketball player in Japan when he came to China for a short trip in 2001. That turned into a 24-year-long stay, during which he met the great Jian, Ming, and many more. Shaan has been working as a youth basketball trainer in small towns across China, and by accident became the face of a famous ad campaign for a Chinese Michael Jordan knockoff brand. About that incredible story and his many more adventures in basketball in China, we're very happy to talk with him today. Shaan Price, welcome.
Thank you. Very good. Wow, you said that better than I would say it. You know my story better than I do.
So Shaan, why don't we start by talking about how you got here, the beginning.
Right.
I think you mentioned it was a short visit.
It was a short visit. So as I said, I was in Japan before. I had a university friend that was here, and he was saying, hey, you should come to China for a visit. I came for a visit. Actually, what he was saying was, forget Japan, China's the place. And I came for a short visit. I actually did not really like it in the beginning. Okay. And I left, came back again, decided to study Chinese. I was using a Fudao Laoshi, a tutor. So I was doing one-on-one Chinese lessons. And my friend just kept saying, China's the future. You should be here. Like Japan, no, China's the future. And like, I give it a try. And as you said, now it's 23, 24 years later, and I'm still here. So yeah. So it was a university friend that got me to make the trip here.
时间很快.
Right. 时间过得很快.
When you came here, especially in the early days, you went traveling far beyond Tier 1 cities. And that was something that very few foreigners did.
Right.
And many people you work with, many people you'd encounter, probably had never seen someone as tall as you are.
Right.
They never interacted with a foreigner. What was that like? What did people say to you?
Depending on which area I traveled in, the Lao Wai accent would be something different. Lao Wai, actually, a lot of my earlier travels were not in the major cities. I've always lived in Beijing, but my earlier travels were not to Shanghai, were not to Guangzhou. Like, I wasn't going to Shenzhen. I wasn't going to the major cities. I was always going to smaller places because that's where the basketball opportunities were more abundant. So a lot of my travels were to smaller places, and that was where I had most of the difficulty with earlier communication with people because of local accents and local dialects. And then the biggest issue was just travel. You didn't have the bullet train system that we have now. It was you're on a slow train, you're on a bus. I got to talk about bus.
Tell me.
So I had a situation once, and this was one of my favorite cities years ago, even to now, but back then was Xiamen. I used to travel to Xiamen quite a bit. So I went there, I would go there for working with youth in youth basketball, and traveled to Xiamen for a youth basketball, I was working with a sports school, and so doing some training there. This was during the winter period. The client did not purchase my return ticket to Beijing, ahead of time. And when I finished working there, I was looking to return to Beijing, talking to the client about, purchasing my flight back. That particular year, there was a winter storm that had hit the south. Roads were iced over, and so people are rushing to buy tickets to go wherever they need to go. And this is also close to Chunyuan, which is, the Chinese New Year's rush. You got millions of people rushing back to their hometowns, and so I found myself stuck there. The client, he said there were no flights, there were no trains, and the only option he was able to find was a long distance bus. I'm thinking I need to get back to Beijing. I don't want to stay here in Xiamen. And so I'm like, whatever, just give me the bus and I'll go back. I was, of course, upset because he didn't prepare things ahead of time. Upset with myself because I didn't check on this earlier. It was supposed to be a 19-hour bus ride back to Beijing. It was a sleeper. Now, I'm 6'5", and those beds on those sleeping buses are not made for someone 6'5". The roads are iced over. The trip took 29 hours. So I'm hours upon hours in this small bunker on the top of this bus with a book, and I'm just kind of reading and trying to sleep, and it had to be the worst trip. We'd stop off at these bus depots where there was food, and the food was mantou and some whatever, mixed vegetables, salted, and so on. It was probably the worst trip that I've had trying to get back to Beijing, during the Chunyuan period. So travel during that period was not so easy, so that's probably the worst trip that I had. Some people would have been extremely angry. I just remember getting off of the bus in Beijing, and I was at that time the long distance bus would let us off and I was living on the east side of Beijing, and let us off on the far west side of the city. And I remember getting off that bus, and I was just elated. I was just so happy to just not be on that bus. And I just started walking. I don't know where I was. I just wanted to walk. And I have like a bag, and I'm just walking. And during that time, Beijing had the Shali, little small cars, small taxis, and a lot of heiche, a lot of like black taxis and I'm getting off the bus, and people are like, yao che, yao che, yao che. I'm like not listening to anyone. I'm just walking with this smile on my face because I'm just like, I just got off of this 29-hour bus ride, and and it's cold in Beijing, and I'm just walking and just happy. I've forgotten about the 29 hours of hell on this bus, and I'm just walking, just like I'm back in Beijing. I don't even know what part of Beijing I'm in. I have no idea where I am. We could be in Shijingshan or somewhere out. I don't know. I'm just happy to be off that bus. And that's kind of how, for me, I look at a lot of things. I may have a frustrating moment, but as soon as I experience something beyond that, the frustrating moment is past. So I can't think of any periods where I've been really, really angry about like anything that took me out.
Tell me about the work. What does a professional basketball player coming to China in 2001 do?
Yes.
I'm assuming you weren't born that rich that you did need to work.
Right. So that's part of the reason why I was here. It was really about the opportunity to work in basketball in a basketball-crazed nation. People here just love the game of basketball, and it's an opportunity to get out and teach, which is what I started doing in Japan. But Japan was heavy on baseball and football, soccer, during that period. And so when I came for that earlier visit, I got a chance to see a bit of the basketball landscape. It wasn't enough to keep me here the first time, but then when I looked at my options back in the US, I'm like, you know what, maybe I'll try China again. And that's kind of what kept me on. And I said, during that period here, I met a gentleman named Jian, who was the first Chinese player to actually play NCAA Division I basketball, played for the University of Utah. He was starting up his own basketball training camps. And I started working along with him. And this was during a period where there just weren't a lot of privately run basketball training camps or schools that existed. Everything was under the government during that period. And my Jian, he was seeking to start his own, and he brought me in, and we were doing projects in and around Hebei province, he's from Tianjin, but lived part of his life in Shijiazhuang, and we were doing a lot of projects in Hebei and also in Beijing. And yeah, that's what kept me on. As I started to see the market grow, my interest grew.
Do you remember the first time going to such a private camp?
My very first one was actually in Beijing. It was at a local high school, and we it was an outdoor camp. We wanted to do longer, but it was a 3-day training camp. But then after 3 days, pretty much all the kids were gone because they were busy with studies. The parents wouldn't allow them to stay for a longer period of time to train basketball. All the kids really wanted to be there, but this was during the summer, when most of the players are free. You know, they're free from school. But came in, we did. It was supposed to have been a 7-day camp, and by the third day, after the third day, most of the kids were gone because they had too much homework for the summer. And that was part of the difficulty with trying to do basketball training then, was kids were bogged down with summer homework. They wouldn't bypass that to go and do sports, except for the ones that are inside of a sports school. So very different atmosphere than now, where, again, you can't find a gym that's not packed with young players training basketball. But there is a catch. Most of the clubs that are running now focus on elementary school kids. Once they get into middle school, they don't have time. So most kids, it's actually a funny saying. We say that the kids, when they enter basketball clubs at between 6 and 8 years old, and they train basketball, they retire at the age of 12. Because by then they're starting to get too busy with homework. You know, so that's one issue with the market. Back then, they just didn't come. You know, they just didn't come at all. You know, so it was very difficult to try to get enough students to keep your regular courses going, you know, throughout the year. So yeah, very different market. So because of that, we had to move around to different places where we could, you know, get groups of kids to participate. And we go to another location, we go to another location. So a lot of moving around, but not a lot of money being made.
How did that work? These training camps were really huge, right?
Right.
So you'd cooperate with Chinese trainers.
Right. So one of the issues we had to deal with then was, you know, and this was an issue back, very difficult situation then, was trying to find local coaches to actually work in our camps. We would visit local universities, so quite a few sports schools with university students that are studying basketball. We'd bring them in, we'd train them and have them work within our company. But I recall we had a camp in Qiaodan, and we had visited a local high school. And at this local high school, there was a PE teacher who he was very well connected in Qiaodan with a lot of families and so on. And so we went to him to ask for him to help us to market, to get kids to come to this camp that we were doing. And so we had previously gone to, it was actually a Hebei Shifang Daxue, so Hebei Normal University. So we go there trying to get university students to come to the club to be like part-time coaches in our summer camp. And we went and did a selection. We had university students doing drills and things like that, and had them doing teaching demonstrations and so on. And we selected 8 guys that we said, okay, during the summer, we're going to be starting these summer camps. We'd like for you to come and work our camps. And we created a brochure with pictures and their names and everything, and had myself and had my Jian on it. And you know, we're prepared to advertise to get kids to come to our camp. So we went to this local high school with this popular PE teacher who was there to help us to bring in, you know, more kids into our camp for the summer. And so we go to him and, you know, we say, okay, here's our brochure. You know, here's all the coaches. We're trying to show him how professional we are so that, you know, he'd be more inclined to help us to get students. So he's kind of looking at the list. He says, to be honest, this is what he's saying, to be honest, I only trust 2 people on this brochure. And we're like, and he's like, that's you, Shaan, and my Jian. everyone else on here, I know what they know. And I'm just like, well, what do you mean? He's like, I know what they know. They don't know anything. And I'm thinking, well, but you've never met any of these young coaches or young university students that are trying to be coaches. He's like, no. And he's going through this whole spiel about, you don't understand, the China sports, like sports situation. Like these guys, I know what they know. They're not going to be able to teach a good class. And I'm thinking, you've never met any of them, and you're just looking at their picture and just saying like no. But basically, what he's saying is that, and during that time, that what they're studying in school is not properly preparing them to be good coaches within, say, our basketball training camps or any others. And so his whole take was, in order for you to be good, you need to get some people from outside, outside the country or outside of Shijiazhuang, but definitely not this list of part-time coaches. Which, in my take, when we did our camps, those students, they worked hard, they listened, they tried as hard as they could based on the knowledge that they have. And our camps were generally successful, that summer. It's just hard to recruit more kids to come just because of the amount of pressure they have from schools. So that was my take on it. I'm sure he'd have a different take, but we did have to use a method where I would be the main teacher of something, or my Jian would be the main teacher of something, and we separate kids into groups, and the coaches would run stations. We didn't allow them to be the head coaches at that time. Market is different now, but then, yeah, that was the case. We did kind of run into some problems with, I want my child to learn basketball, but there's also the side where parents are saying, I'm afraid my child will get hurt. So some parents did not like the idea of having competition, because the idea of their child bumping into another kid, they wanted their child to learn dribbling and shooting and passing, the skills of basketball, but they didn't actually want their kids to compete. So that was one of the issues we kind of dealt with then. And so we're bringing in university students to come in and coach. These are university students that have studied basketball, as a course in school, but they hadn't played. So we're asking them to come and teach and use our particular system where we're saying we're trying to teach kids how to compete. And so that, in some ways, it's what helped us to somewhat succeed in the market, because we were doing something that was different from what others were doing. But in other ways, it also made difficulties for us, because some parents just did not want their kids to compete. So, and then obviously with competition, you have all the other things that come in with that. Learning how to lose, and what type of personality or attitude you should have when you lose. And parents take it personal when their child loses. If they see their child is playing in a game and the child loses, it's hurting the parent also. I don't want to see my child, upset because they just lost. So it's a lot of things that came into play with that. So for me personally, it was just a huge learning curve. One funny thing I say is that I used to always say to myself, I've learned more about the game of basketball while being here than all the years of me playing and coaching basketball previous to coming to China. And the reason is that here you're forced to break the game down in a very, very simple way, and then slowly build each component back up, which I never thought about teaching that way when I'm in the West. If I was in the U.S., 20 years ago teaching basketball, coaches at home will just say, just get the keys to the gym, open the gym, throw the ball in, and let them go. You know, here it's every single detail. Like you may be teaching a child, you know, shooting or pivoting or something, and the parents are watching, and if you're not correcting them on a particular aspect of shooting or pivoting, the parent is like, well, you know, like my child is not pivoting correctly. You know, like can you teach him how to pivot correctly, or can you know, his elbow is out when he's shooting or something. Like they're looking at those kind of details, and you're just like, wow, like, you know, I got 15 kids here, and every parent, you know, sees one detail that they want you to fix within their child, you know, today, you know, because, you know, like they've paid for their child to come, or they want their child to learn, and you know, every single detail for them becomes important. So those are like major differences that I think has helped me to understand certain parts about like just skill acquisition and development, you know, child development, you know, that I probably never would have thought about if I had not come here.
That makes me admire all the more of these early Chinese basketball stars like Jian and Ming. It makes me wonder what they must have gone through, the struggles they must have had to overcome to make it all the way to places like the NBA.
Well, you know, speaking of Jian with his situation, and even with Yao Ming and Wang Zhizhi and like a lot of those players, you know, one thing is that these players, because they've gone through the state-run sports system, that when you enter one of those professional teams, you're basically signing a long-term contract with those teams. You enter a team at the age of 12, 13, you're signing a 15, potentially maybe a 20-year contract. That's pretty much your life as a player within that one organization. So in order for you to leave that organization and go off to the US or wherever else, you have to get permission from the team that basically owns your rights, which means that either one, the team has to have benefited from you in some way. You know, like in Yao Ming's situation, the Shanghai Sharks, they won a championship. You know, in Ma Jian's situation, you know, he used a different method to go abroad. He went abroad and played, but once he looked to return, he was kind of somewhat shunned by, you know, the organizations that had the rights to, you know, his development. You know, and so and that's the way that, and I can understand this part, that an organization, they invest in your development. You know, they've developed you to a certain level, and then you want to break off and leave, and they're not getting anything in return. You know, so that I see it from their standpoint. You know, but the other side, when you have athletes that are playing at that level, again, a Yao Ming or Ma Jian or Wang Zhizhi, they want to challenge themselves against the best players in the world. They're already at the top of Chinese basketball. You know, these guys want to get out and see, well, what is my level like, you know, against the best players in the world, while at the same time representing their country. You know, so the difficulty for them, especially you're talking Ma Jian in the 90s, you know, Yao Ming in the early 2000s, Wang Zhizhi in the early 2000s, like those are difficult periods for players to actually leave their current teams to go off to play in the NBA or NCAA and things like that. So those difficult times for those players.
How about the young kids that you worked with when you came here in 2001, 2003? Were they having similar dreams to kids in American schools, or was it different? It
was different. Then you'd have kids that they love watching the NBA. I don't think there was a lot of kids that had dreams of playing in the NBA. At times, I feel like players have this inferiority complex that, oh, we're not as strong as the West, you know, as the West. We're not as competitive as, say, the black athlete. We're not as athletic as the black athlete or something like that. We're not as strong as the white athlete. Like oftentimes I'd hear these kind of things as I travel around, as old, you know. I've had coaches, I've seen players that I would say, this kid could play, Division I basketball in the U.S. and coaches saying, no, like, it's always this. Then it was always this. Oh, he's, Chinese kids, our bodies are different. Like we're not as competitive. I think we're a long ways off from being able to send players abroad to play. Like there was always these negative returns on, I'd say this kid has the ability, and there's always this negative feedback or negative return to, no, we're, not as strong or not as this. And I'm just like, but you've never seen this kid play against that level of competition. How do you just exclude his ability or just count out his ability without giving him a chance? And that was very, very common then, and now there's players that are playing university basketball in the U.S. that have played and played in the NBA and so on. So, but then you're talking early 2000s, and my Jian's era in the 90s. I'm sure that no one ever thought that a Chinese player could play at those levels.
When did that change?
Yao Ming's entry. Wang Zhizhi was the first, but I think with Yao Ming, because he was the first very successful, that put a huge change in the market. But it also, one thing that it caused some problem for the market, it was that then there became this over-focus on tall players and not enough development on guards and wings. Everything was about, let's get more height.
Okay, so speaking of struggles, I wanted to ask you about something you alluded to earlier, namely that there wasn't a lot of money around. And that, of course, is a universal struggle at that time. Everybody was hungry. Everybody wanted to build something. And you build a business together with Chinese partners. Why don't you take us back to that? What was that like? What were the conversations like?
So interesting with that. I mean, that project itself was spearheaded by Jian. And I worked on a project with Jian. Early on, we were just doing these one-off camps. Again, the biggest issue was just marketing. It was, I'd say a couple of things. It was not just the money for affording marketing. It was the ability to, how do you reach certain groups of kids to be able to market? All the kids are in schools. You can't market inside of a school. You can't go and take a poster and hang it on a telephone pole, because you can't really put out advertisement like that. That was seen as illegal. So you couldn't, it was difficult. The only way you could do your marketing was through relationships with PE teachers in a school or some administrators within a school. And often to build those relationships, you have to pay, a coach to, either you pay the coach or you bring him on as a part of your staff so that he's making money in order for him to help you to get kids. So a lot of it was either one, you already have a previous relationship to where you don't have to come off with so much money in order to help someone to help you to get kids, or you use a relationship that introduces you to another relationship and you pay a bit of money to get, try to get kids into your program. So a lot of it was that. Now we did one thing. This was in 2006 or 7, can't remember the exact year. We actually worked with China Mobile in Qiaodan, and during that period, they used to have, with a lot of their VIP customers, you're a frequent user of China Mobile services, and you use so many, back then you would buy the telephone cards. You're a frequent user of their services. If you're spending a certain amount each month, then what happens is they list you as like a VIP, like China Mobile user. And the VIPs, what they would do is each month, they offer certain incentives to their VIP users. And so this was in Qiaodan. We went to China Mobile, the Qiaodan headquarters for Qiaodan City. And we go there, and my Jian was there. He's the one doing all the talking, and talks with the guy who was head of that particular center, and said, we have our VIP customers. We have over 100,000 VIP customers around Qiaodan. What we'd like to do is offer our VIP customers a 2-day trial at one of your basketball camps, a 2-day free trial, and China Mobile will basically, if they sign up, China Mobile pays us the money for the kid to come for a 2-day trial, and then if we're able to keep the kid, the kid likes it and he signs up for a longer period. And on a Tuesday, they sent out text message, to all of their, VIP customers, here's a free trial for your child. They did it 2 Tuesdays. And I recall after that second Tuesday, we had over 300 kids that signed up for one of our camps, for a summer camp. And so like that part, those kind of marketing ideas are the things that obviously bring in kids a lot faster. But outside of that, it was mostly just connections with PE teachers within schools or school administrators that would help us to get kids to come participate, or working with the local sports school. If you do that, there's no money in that.
That's very interesting, because back in those days, when a foreigner would come, especially to those smaller places, the reaction seemed to be often, ooh, he's a foreigner, he must be so rich.
Yeah, right.
And you were facing basically the same situation that everybody else was facing. How do I get to be where I want to be?
Right. I think one of the things that probably helped me early on was when I first got into the sport, I was always around people that were heavily connected within various associations or various, whether it was schools, whether it was professional teams, whether it was sports schools, or people within the sports governing body. I always worked with people that were associated within that, within those entities. And so that made my personal introduction into basketball in China probably a lot easier. I didn't go to the front door and knock and say, hello, I'm a foreign guy from America, and I want to teach basketball here. I would enter in with someone else who was already connected. And so that made things a lot easier. In the beginning, I did a lot of very, very low pay or free demos and coaching clinics and things like that that helped to kind of build a bit of reputation in the market, allow people to kind of trust what I do. Because there's also this ongoing thought that, you foreigners, you know basketball, or but you don't understand China. You don't understand Chinese basketball. You don't understand how to work with Chinese players. You don't know our system. You don't know our way of thinking. Like that's always somewhat existed, and I think for anyone from outside coming into the market, it's probably one of the more difficult things about trying to enter the China market, and whether you're teaching basketball or football or doing business here, it's probably one of the more difficult things is just the whole thing about you don't understand China. And trying to get past that is maybe one of the bigger hurdles. I was able to, I've always had people that helped me through those situations, because there were people that they're already working in the system.
At this point, we would like to take a moment to tell you about our project. The period between China's opening in 1979 under Deng Xiaoping and the 2010 Shanghai Expo deserves to be remembered. We want to collect the memories that Chinese, Americans, and other foreigners made together during these times. We hope you will subscribe to our channel to see many more interviews like this one in the coming weeks. If you too have a story that you think needs to be remembered, we would very much like to hear from you. And we would like to thank the U.S. Consulate in Shanghai for their generous support. Without their sponsorship, we would not have been able to start this channel.
There is, of course, one story we really have to talk about. It's the Michael Jordan story.
That was also in Xiamen. So early on, and this is one thing to understand, that a lot of the larger Chinese shoe companies, your Li-Ning and Anta, Piker, now they use NBA players, or top CBA players, the Chinese Basketball Association players, as to endorse their products. Well, early on when I came into China, there was no sign of any NBA player coming into this market. And what a lot of these companies would do in order to promote their products is they wanted someone who looked similar or like an NBA player. And I was doing basketball, I'm coaching basketball, I'm teaching, and I'd have one company. I had one company that contacted me because I used to do some work in Xiamen, and it was someone introduced me to someone who was looking for a guy who looked like basketball. So I did one job, and what would happen is during that period is when one company uses you, others want to use you. Now, this is opposite. If I'm in the U.S., if Nike uses me, Adidas definitely will not use me for the advertisement. They don't want to see the same person in competing brands. But during that period, it's Li-Ning used you? Well, we want to use you over here in Anta. Or Anta used you, we want to use you in Peak. And so there was a period where my picture would appear in competing companies. But there's the brand, the Chinese Jordan brand, Qiaodan. And that company, I think it was about a few years back, they got sued by Michael Jordan and Nike for using Michael Jordan's name. In the China market, they registered the Qiaodan, the Chinese characters, which is what everyone uses to call Michael Jordan. They registered his name, and they registered a logo, an image of him. But they couldn't use Michael Jordan. And at the time, I knew that they were the Chinese version of Michael Jordan, but I was asked to do an advertisement, and it was always very, very common that they'd have pictures, and they'd say, like companies, they'd have a picture of a Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or something. They say, "Can you do this?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm not Michael Jordan. I'm not Kobe Bryant. Like they want you to do a pose or do something and mimic exactly what's in the picture." It's like, so they had me do some jumping in the air with the ball and so on. And yeah, they had me do a Michael Jordan type of pose, and that became the image that they used across the country for their brand. And yeah, and then years later, Michael Jordan suing them, and I'm thinking, I was a part of the creation of their image, but this was early on. This is 2003 that I did that advertisement, and back then they weren't using.
So you were introduced to people in China as a fake Jordan.
I was the poster boy for the Chinese fake Jordan. You can't really call them Chinese fake Jordan because now the company Qiaodan is an extremely large company that has in Xinjiang, down in Fujian, they have a massive factory there, and they produce more than just their own shoe. They actually do manufacturing for other brands and so on. But it was a time when in that region is where majority of the sports shoe companies are made. Those companies were producing, I visited those factories there. They produce a lot of products for overseas companies, Nike, Adidas, and so on, they produce. And what they would do is they produce in their factory, and then down the road, they open another factory and they make their own brand based on what they're producing here. A lot of people used to say, a lot of my Chinese friends would say, oh, I always thought that was the real Jordan brand. I was like, yeah, no, it's two different brands, you know. So that was then. People know now because they're not allowed to use the Chinese characters. They can only use the pinyin, Qiao, Qiao, Dan, Dan. They can use that, but they can't use they're not supposed, they can still use the logo and the pinyin, but they cannot use the Chinese characters.
You know, it sounds like it would really happen a lot that foreigners in China would be invited by companies to do all kinds of strange things.
Oh, it's very common, very common, very common. I was the 2008 Olympic basketball logo, or not logo, but image. Only got paid 300 RMB, basically taxi money for that. But yeah, it was, I did, someone contacted me because again, they know I was doing basketball. They contacted me and asked would I be interested in doing an image for the Beijing Olympics. I'm like, cool. I'm thinking, wow, how much money is that going to be? And they said, look, it's the Beijing Olympic Committee. They're not going to pay a lot. I was like, what's not a lot? He's like, 300 RMB. I'm like, what? He goes, hey, you can do it or not. They'll just try to find someone else. I was like, well, you know, it'd be cool to do the, you know, Olympic basketball. And so I went, literally, it was 3 shots. He had me do some movement, 3 shots. I was paid my 300 RMB, I was gone. And prior to the Olympics, about 3 to 6, I'd say about 3 months before the Olympics started, these images started popping up all over the city. I was a billboard outside of the Beijing, the Tisan, the new airport section, huge billboard there, right next to the Hilton Hotel, Wangfujing. I had an image that was covering the whole building, just images everywhere. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. People are calling me, hey man, this is your picture on the side of the building. And you know, man, you must have got really paid for that. I'm thinking, yeah, I got, it's okay, 300 RMB. So yeah, that